Financial support for the production of Issues in Education is provided by the Florida State University License Plate. Your FSU license plate supports scholarships for students who enrich and contribute to our communities. Special programs, gift certificates, and rebates for first-time buyers online at fsu.edu/mytag.
Coming up today on Issues in Education, technology in higher education. We look at the benefits, the challenges, and the management of having information right at our fingertips in a college classroom. Welcome to Issues in Education. I'm Suzanne Smith, alongside my co-host, Florida State University President, Dr. Eric Barron. We've come a long way from film strips and overhead projectors to help instructors demonstrate a concept in the classroom, but the benefits also come with challenges. Professors and students have had to come up with new ways to manage the technology. Joining us to talk about the modern-day college classroom are Dr. Jennifer Koslow, Associate Professor of History and Chair of the Undergraduate Policy Committee at FSU, and Rosalia Contreras. She is FSU's Student Body President. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so my first question is actually for everybody at the table. Back when, we've got several generations here, back when you were in college, what kind of technology were you using when you were in school? Dr. Koslow.
When I started, I was sent off to the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a state-of-the-art electronic typewriter that was portable, and it was about this big. And I trudged that thing through the snow because other friends wanted that new technology too, so we shared that typewriter, electronic typewriter, and it could show you one line of text. And of course I was printing, it was an actual typewriter, so it just printed right there and then. And you sometimes had to cut and paste and lots of whiteout for those mistakes, but it was state of the art when I started.
Dr. Barron, what about you?
Well, I think it's fair to say the technology was out of the classroom. That's an example. You know, overhead projectors, of course, but I remember going to Strozier because they had 4 scientific calculators, new thing that you could sit there and solve problems with. And so you were sent somewhere, basically, to have access to the technology. It wasn't in the classroom.
I remember my senior year, LexisNexis was like just coming in, and you know, I had a computer and a laptop, but the laptop was like your word processor, huge and difficult to carry, and everybody wanted to borrow it and use it, and it was just, technology was very different back then. Rosie, your experience must be completely different on that.
A bit different. I've certainly benefited from a lot of what the internet has brought sort of to humanity in the classroom. And especially in our libraries. I think our libraries have done a very good job of keeping up with the technology and instructing students on how to best use that technology. But I would say, especially in the classroom, the amount of technology that's at your disposal, if your professors allow it, is pretty incredible. So you're able to augment your learning in class. If you so desire, you can augment it while you're in that class, and I think that's an incredible use of technology.
Maybe it would be a good idea to update everybody on just the types of things we have today. So if you wander around the campus, somebody's always saying something about Blackboard. What is Blackboard?
Blackboard is a course management tool for both professors and for students. So instead of everyone getting a handout or a mimeograph, you are able to put up your syllabus there, any announcements there, your class PowerPoints there, and that's the basic components most faculty put up. Some move beyond that to have discussion boards so that you can continue your conversations online. There's a blog feature, there's a wiki feature. There's all different kinds of...
Now explain what a wiki feature is.
So a wiki is an editable web page where multiple people can go in and write or add pictures or anything else. So rather than one person being the author, multiple people can be the author, and you can keep editing it as you go. So it can be, I use it in a classroom to get students to learn how to write with one voice. And you know, it's very difficult in the beginning because we're mostly used to writing just for ourselves and for our instructor. But then to be able to write with each other it gives you that collaboration that you wouldn't have otherwise. So there are all those components as part of Blackboard, and it always keeps adding new features, such as the ability to add video or audio or all different kinds of things.
Rosie, how much do students use Blackboard in actually advancing or integrating their knowledge of what they've learned in the classroom?
I think that often, at least in my experience, has been up to the professor and how much he or she wants to engage with Blackboard. I've found when Dr. Koslow was speaking that interesting that the younger professors that I've had tend to use technology outside of Blackboard to augment their course instruction. So there is the wiki feature, there is a blog component, a discussion forum, but I can recall one class specifically where the professor used blogging tools and used, other website creation websites to augment what he was teaching in the class, even though those functions were already built into Blackboard. So it's almost like I think some professors are just now starting to get familiar with Blackboard, and they'll use it somewhat minimally. And then those that are really groundbreaking in their classroom will use that, but also bring in some outside tools as well.
So that's a functionality, communication, interaction. The other thing that everybody talks about is being online in a classroom, and even fully online. And will this be the next future? Have you taken online classes at Florida State?
Yes, I have.
What was your experience?
So I did take an online class. I actually took my computer fluency class online, which is a bit ironic. But I found that there's a certain human element, of course, that's missing with your instructor. It becomes more about fulfilling the requirements and making sure that you are on time, which is a lesson in and of itself. So I think I learned more what it means to have discipline in guiding yourself to complete the tasks on time. But also I think it is also up to the instructor, because there are some instructors that make themselves very available outside of online classrooms, and there are some that, because they're teaching from a remote site, perhaps cannot interact with you. But I was lucky to have an online instructor who was present and was able to meet with students from his online class outside of that setting.
Now, Dr. Koslow, you are receiving an Excellence in Online Course Design for a course that you did. What made your course different from other courses?
I think the interactive components made it different. It's HIS 4164 digital history, and so the students learn how to collect, preserve, and interpret history using digital mediums. And I think it's just as Rosalia was saying, the interaction is a little different at first because I'm used to sitting in a room with either 20 or 120 students, but getting that face-to-face interaction. And so this was a very different experience. The students were going online, listening to the lectures, doing their blogs, tweeting, doing all these things, but not necessarily at the same time that I was online. So in that way, it was a different type of interaction. But I did Skype with students whenever they wanted, or not whenever they want, when we could make an appointment. But they tended, it was very interesting, they tended to do their work in the wee hours of the morning, always when I was asleep. But but the interaction, that everything, when you have to write down every single thing you do, you learn to be very clear after 15 weeks. And so some students truly benefited because they were disciplined and they followed those steps through the course, and at the end their writing had improved to an unbelievable extent because they had to be clear, because that was the only way to communicate to me on a regular basis. So every week they were writing, and interacting not only with me through writing, but interacting with their fellow peers through writing. And so I saw great benefits in that. But I designed my course so that every week they would be doing something to maintain both interest in the course, mastery of the material, and just overall engagement.
So is this, in your mind, good for everyone, or good for some students, they're really an online student, and others you wouldn't recommend it? Or
I think for students who have not learned how to be self-disciplined, who are still transitioning to that ability to be independent, to set their own time schedule, to remember that they have to set themselves a certain amount of time to accomplish tasks. That can be unforgiving in an online environment. That can, in the face-to-face, you can sometimes work with students who are struggling. So I think it can be for everybody, but I think for some students, it's not that they can't do it, it's just a steep learning curve to be able to remember, I am really in charge of my education, every aspect of it, from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, and I have to make sure I balance everything. And that, as we know, when you're 18 to 21, can be a struggle to learn those skills. But I think they're all capable of it.
What, Rosie, what differences do you see for students who are taking the online classes? Do you see the sort of the same thing she's talking about that you mentioned? You do have to be, more the time-sensitive nature of it, but your classmates and others. Do you see that same thing with them? Do you get to work with them? Because there's always like group projects usually in a lot of classrooms. Do you still do that in an online setting?
Yeah, and I think something that's important, and I think can come from a lot of faculty support in that course, is to make sure that the students aren't building bad habits. Because I've seen in certain cases where a student will take an online course early on, and perhaps the teacher was more lackadaisical than most, and so they start building bad habits and thinking that online courses are, that you can copy from one another's work, or that you can, get one assignment done in a group and all submit the same sort of assignment. Those bad habits that you build because there isn't an empathy that you're building with your professor. So you think, oh, I can just submit this and it'll be fine. This is just a class I need for, a liberal studies requirement or something. Those kind of bad habits, I think, can be extinguished really early on if you have an instructor that, like Dr. Koslow, goes out of his or her way to build that empathy, even if through online communication with their students. So I have seen some of my peers really flourish in those settings, and because they work full-time jobs, they can benefit from that setting. And then others who just use it as a mechanism, sort of to take the easy way out. But they get stopped short when they have a professor who makes them work a little bit harder.
There are a lot of people that argue that one of the very best things about online education, not what a lot of people are saying that it's cheap, it's the most important element of it is that you have a higher potential to be a lifelong learner. Because, that worked really well, I understood it, I'm disciplined, I'm working on this career, I think I'll go take a course in this, and do you see yourself as evolving that way? You can pick up any course and...
Right, and I think that's why websites like Khan Academy, these MOOC courses online that are made available to everybody, that's why I think they've become so popular, because people coming into maybe their fourth or fifth decade and they say, I didn't get the chance to get the master's degree that I wanted. They see this information that's available online, this reputable information. It's not just information gathered across the internet. They have a place to go where they can take control of their education. And I think for my generation, perhaps it's something that we're already embedded in, that we understand that you are going to continue your learning experience sort of lifelong. But for some older generations, I think it's useful for them to know they have an outlet, a reputable outlet to do that.
Let's talk some more about the challenges and managing the challenges, like she was saying, the bad habits, and what kind of things do students do and don't realize that it's wrong? Dr. Koslow, what do you see?
Well, I call it late night panic. Right? So there's a very clear academic honesty policy on campus, and there are a number of tools that professors have used past and present to maintain that. The most current one is an online feature called Turn It In or Safe Assign. And what it allows faculty to do is the students upload their paper and then it compares it against paid databases. So we can see if that paper was handed in by another student at this university or another university, and really compare, word for word, and ask students, is this your original words? You know, and essentially you're looking for mistakes. You know, where do students repeat the exact same mistake more than where they get things right all the time? You're looking for wrong mistakes. But so it can be a really useful tool for that, where students, I don't think they necessarily think it's okay to do what they're doing, but I think they get sloppy or panicked, that they're overwhelmed, that they have not managed their time well, not given themselves enough time to do the material, and they do panic. I've never met a student who violated the policy because they just willy-nilly did. It's always they just made a mistake. You know, they honestly made a mistake and panicked, or didn't think through the ethical repercussions. But I've never met a student who wasn't sorry that they made those mistakes. So, but it does, the online medium gives professors another important tool to be able to identify plagiarism, although I think most faculty follow the guidelines that they used even before they had the online. It just makes it easier for us to identify.
Rosie, maybe you could take that from the student perspective. Are expectations clear? Are the opportunities too great to just be able to go grab something? Or how do you see the same issue?
I think it's a difficult, distinction for some students, myself included, to make, because we do see this online, the internet as such a collaborative tool. I mean, we use it every single day to collaborate with our friends, collaborate with organizations that we're working with. And so when you get into the classroom, you sort of bring in that same spirit, especially with an online classroom, because often you can feel like you're at it alone. And again, I qualify that by saying the professor really makes the difference. But in some cases, some students don't feel as self-motivated, and they may feel motivated by their peers. So I think when they make honest mistakes, like perhaps submit an assignment that their group worked on, or they commit an error that I don't think they meant to, I think those things come from an understanding of technology that hasn't yet been able to be applied to the classroom yet.
I guess having a conversation with students at the beginning of the semester sort of helps to deal with some of this, and I'm assuming, do most of the professors do that, or Jennifer, do you do that as well?
Well, every professor, every syllabus has to include a reference to the policy, and so that is there for every student to think about.
Would you get into specifics? I mean, when you talk to them about, don't use this, do this.
I explain to students this course I'm teaching, for instance, right now, whether it is or is not okay to use outside sources. So that is clear. If I'm only working, I only want to use the readings from the class, then you're only allowed to use readings from the class. If you are allowed or not allowed to work with other students as you accomplish this, especially in the online course, and again, everything has to be written down in an online course for it to matter to students, because that is your one way to communicate to everybody. With the face-to-face, you can explain all of that within the classroom, what is and what is not okay. It's one of those things where the students are still responsible for what they turn in. So usually we talk about the difference between cut and pasting off of Wikipedia versus trying to paraphrase in your own words. And so most faculty do try and communicate to students what are the boundaries. And I think the difficult part for students is, because they are used to working in collaborative settings, how do you do that in each of the different disciplines? What's okay in one discipline and what is not okay in another discipline? And I think that's where sometimes students find themselves in difficulties. But 9 times out of 10, the faculty member is supposed to, every single time they're supposed to indicate what the boundaries are. And 9 times out of 10, I think they do a good job. There is some room, I think, for faculty to always remind themselves, well, just because you talked about last semester, you still need to talk about it this semester, to let a whole new group of students know what is and what is not okay.
So we think about this generation of students as being very tech savvy. is there a gap between the faculty and the students, or sometimes the faculty and the lead and pulling people along in the technology, or is it the other way around, or it's not noticeable?
Well, I would say I've faced some issues in classes where my idea of using technology is really to enhance either a project I'm submitting or enhance a presentation that I may have to give. And because of the lack of familiarity with those tools, a professor may not see it as adding value to the classroom, when really I've seen it when it does. So there can be resistance on that end. So it sort of just takes that initial step to show them, what value is bringing in a blog about this. How is that different, and how can that benefit the classroom? But there have been some professors that are really resistant to it, simply because it's unknown.
What about you, Jennifer? And there's also the aspect of the distractions in the classroom. Rosie had mentioned that some professors don't allow her to use technology in the classroom.
I'm one of those professors. I actually find it to be incredibly distracting for me when someone has their hand in their lap and all I do when I talk is I look at students. So when they're reading a textbook or a newspaper, or, giggling while I'm talking about typhoid, it's distracting. It's incredibly distracting. And when I go and watch students who are graduate students, who are doctoral students, who are learning to teach, and I see students on Facebook killing zombies, all kinds of crazy things, it's not only distracting for the professor, it's actually distracting for all the people around you. So I tend to, I would love if I were talking about typhoid and students were all of a sudden saying, well, can we go look at some websites about typhoid? I would be over the moon, but my experience has not been over the moon. In fact, it's been quite the opposite. So now I liken it to going on an airplane. To please turn off all your electronic devices, and you get them all to turn them back on when we end. But it's very difficult for the faculty member when you're trying to give a 50-minute presentation or an hour and 15-minute presentation, and people aren't paying attention because they're clearly doing something else. It's very hard for the faculty member to do their best presentation in that kind of circumstance. So I'm optimistic that maybe 15 years from now that's the case, that people will use the technology in the classroom to enhance their education. But so far, when I do my student evaluations for the grad students in those 180-person classes, that's unfortunately not what I see going on.
Thank you both very much. We've been talking with FSU's Dr. Jennifer Koslow and SGA President Rosalia Contreras about technology use in the college classroom. When we come back, Dr. Barron and I will talk one-on-one about more issues in education.
A spirit roams these parts. A spirit of respect, competition, and academic greatness. Some call our spirit myth. Others call it legend. We call it Florida State University.
Welcome back to Issues in Education. I'm Suzanne Smith, talking with Dr. Eric Barron, the president of Florida State University. Dr. Barron, we've been talking about the growing role of technology in the classroom. Do you see the issues becoming more complicated as time goes on, or less complicated?
I'm sure they will get more complicated, just by virtue of the sheer amount of data that you can access and how it is that you might utilize that, to your ability to communicate and interact. And I think we're barely touching the part of it that are critical thinking skills. We've kind of focused on delivery of content, and we have a long way to go.
Online learning is growing more and more every year. What issues do you see happening with that and expanding it at FSU?
Okay, so we're looking at it very seriously. Of course, you add flexibility to the student and how it is that they get things done. You promote lifelong learning, and it may be that you can do a lot of this without having that same physical plant investment that you had before. So it It has a lot of potential benefits. Of course, the hybrid between a traditional class and technology also has a lot of benefit. I don't think it'll replace the university. I think that a university delivers a lot more than just content, but we're going to see it more and more common.
The fall is when you give your annual State of the University speech. What do you want people to take away from it this year?
Well, I want people to see that the path to excellence, which our legislators will see as us going up in the rankings, that this is something quite achievable, and that we can be very deliberate about focusing on areas of student success and making sure that they have a high quality experience. That's one element. A second element is also, it's not just the excellence, but can we promote those elements that make our students successful in careers, and even have this university do a lot more on the job creation side, which is something that major research universities have been doing for decades, but we can do a lot more today. And the last bit is everybody's looking for ways to judge the performance of universities. And there are a lot of those that are emerging, and we need to think carefully about performance funding. That's something whose time has come.
Real quick, the FSU Board of Trustees met in October. What was probably the biggest issue that came out of that? Okay,
from my viewpoint is we have preeminence funding, we're hiring faculty, we're working hard on retention and graduation issues. One of the issues we're going to bump into is, do we have the space and the modern laboratories to put all these interesting, exciting, innovative faculty in? It costs a lot of money, and right now the construction money is just not out there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barron. That's our time for now. Please join us again next month for more Issues in Education. You can watch the premiere episode of Issues in Education the first Friday of every month at 7:30 p.m. That means you can see the next new episode on Friday, December 6th on WFSU-TV. Join us as we discuss the latest developments in higher education happening around the state and across the country. If you have questions that you would like us to address on this program, you can email us at issues@wfsu.org. Again, that's issues@wfsu.org. If you'd like to see any past episodes of Issues in Education, head to the President's website at president.fsu.edu. I'm Suzanne Smith with Florida State University President Dr. Eric Barron for Issues in Education. We'll see you next time.
Financial support for the production of Issues in Education is provided by the Florida State University License Plate. Your FSU license plate supports scholarships for students who enrich and contribute to our communities. Special programs, gift certificates, and rebates for first-time buyers online at fsu.edu/mytag.